Good morning, Richard.
Hey, good morning, Stephen. How you doing?
How are you?
Good, good.
So this is Prefecture Goes podcast. I'm Stephen Powell, and I have my partner in crime, Richard Banks. And today we are going to talk about power grids, which is part of our five-part series about our circular city and the elements that are inside of it. So let's get started.
All right. All right.
We were just talking before we came online here about the Benjamins.
Okay.
And I was talking about how my heat cost me so much up in New York State. So, this is applicable to this conversation. So, what do you envision in the current circular city? Let's start there, and then we'll work our way backwards.
Well, um, that's one thing we need to hear from you guys with how do you monetize in the city? You could blockchain, Bitcoin, credits. How are we going to pay for these things, kind of thing, from your generational point of view, the Gen X and Generation Alpha? What do you foresee as far as? And then I bring up, but it's kind of old school, but I bring up Amish, how the Amish or the communities that work together, like churches and stuff that don't, and of course you could also say governments, how they work without worrying about the cost. But somewhere along the line, someone did labor to pay for that, and someone has to get paid in some way. How do you have a money system kind of thing to pay for things, or to pay for labor, or to reward labor? What we try, and in some circular cities, like the different projects, like the Venus project and the Aravana project, those futuristic cities always mention like resource base or trading or barter, some kind of system. But yeah, how do you reward that? So it's interesting. That's what we need to hear from our people who are viewing. We want to hear from, how do you see the future without capitalism or socialism? How do you see a world beyond that? Like they do on, if you watch like I said, I'm not really big into Star Wars, but like Star Trek or most of the space movies, you don't ever see, like, Buck Rogers says, you have any money, or I'm short a little bit, or paying for meals. There's never a bill coming in, block or anything. So I don't remember ever seeing that. So how did they get to that point in between, from a monetized government system to to going beyond, beyond the horizon and all that kind of stuff, with the
Right.
with the sci-fi part? How do you get to, how do you get from science to sci-fi kind of thing? So I wonder.
It's interesting you brought that up, and of course, this topic, it's about power grids, is really fundamental about based on money. It can be about finance, because, when we look at our current state, how we manage our power grids, or how we manage our resources currently in this certain specific time, we have a whole slew of different types of ways of generating power. And each one states that they're better in some way than others. Whether we go really old school and say coal manufacturing, or we go with, nuclear, then they say that's clean energy, but then you have obviously the waste at the end, when the uranium is depleted. Or we have wind power, which, of course, is super green, but it requires a lot of windmills in some place, which some can argue dirties up the landscape, the environmental landscape, although it produces energy that comes from the wind and doesn't have any kind of negative polluting CO2 type activities. We have solar as well. Solar is definitely in that grouping of the same thing. But again, it takes a lot of land space to, solar, and we can touch on different things with that in a minute, because there's some other ideas I know you've brought to the conversation today with solar. There's geothermal, which can be used to generate electricity. And then there's hydroelectric and whatever other, but each one of those has, no matter which one of them, they have an impact. And each one of those has a cost assigned to it and has which one is more efficient, from a financial perspective. So I think that, what you're saying is, when we look at our current society, we have to pay for the power.
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't necessarily have to pay for the power because they add solar panels to their, homes or whatever. And then all of a sudden they start having the meter go the other direction, which is, an interesting phenomenon we can touch on. But then someone else is still paying for that power, So, when we start talking about these power grids, and asset types and finance, it becomes a precarious thing because I think, am I correct, in the circular city that we're coming up with, it's sort of a utopian type thing. People are sharing different types of skills and receiving benefits from other people, for their shared skills. So I guess the question, since we're bringing it up, should people pay for electricity in the circular city if they're contributing in other ways?
Because if you think about if you're not creating a lot of waste and things in the circular city, everything in our circular city is based on why it's called Prefecture Go Academy. Go in Japanese means 5. So we've limited the resources when we talk about the construction part of the game, is that we've limited to go in Japanese means 5, and we limited to building 5 different pieces of everything. So it limits the creating like 100 different choices of things, because then that creates more waste, and then that's not sustainable. So we need to create when you're building, how do you say it? I guess when you're creating, I lost my train of thought. Different resources. If you limit, your what's available, it's you can do recycling and all that stuff. But I think I don't know. What was the question again? I kind of.
Do you envision people paying for electricity, or are they looking at like using, receiving it? We'll use the word loosely, free, because maybe someone's a medical professional. They're contributing their talents as a medical professional, where someone is an engineer contributes their talents as engineer, or someone that is, a teacher contributes their talents as a teacher. And instead of receiving money for their tasks, do they receive things like food from the from the section that develops food, and they receive their power and their education, like all the every resource, but electricity and power specifically in this conversation, they receive that for, we'll use the word trade.
Okay, so that's what Kaylee, our AI, is about, is that whatever you put into the city, you should get back out. And like I said, we're asking our audience how to kind of think about that. Is that if it measures labor, like in gaming, if I'm inputting a lot to fix the city or develop things, and it gets input in the AI, I should get a reward for that, just like in gaming, and you should get a reward. So it should pay me back in, whether I want meals or entertainment or whatever luxury or needs I need, it should pay me back in that way. But I think, going back to my point about your living area in our circular city, in a fictitious city, and in future cities, you're not powering your individual room. Everything will be so efficient that you're powering the city, and you just happen to have one room that's being powered in the city. So you're not paying for an individual bill for your air conditioning. You're contributing to the city. Like, I guess that's a good example would kind of be loosely like how the Amish do it. It's a community thing. So as long as there's power I guess another example would be the military. When you're going to the military, and you live in their dorms, you're not offered your when I was in the Air Force, you're supposed to be available 24 hours, 365. You're working. You're not getting an hourly salary. You're not getting paid for labor you're doing now. You're getting paid while you're sleeping, while you're working, and you're doing your specific job. And they don't, when I use the utilities or stuff in my dorm, I'm not getting a bill for what I specifically used. The military, the Air Force, and the U.S. government pays for all bases, all electricity, and they give you a monthly salary based on your accomplishment and your rank. So, so you can look, I guess you could look at our Academy City as like half school, half military. But so I would say that it's like I said, you're not getting a specific bill for the energy you use specifically for your room. You're actually contributing to the society and gaining points and credits or whatever monetary system you guys want to develop to pay for the city that you're contributing labor to, and you're getting the labor out. And that's what we're.
So you touched on a point there, and we talked about this. We're looking at like how the city functions, right? And so each, and we'll touch on solar with this for a minute. If the city was powered primarily by solar, and not going down the tangent of redundancy at the moment, but just solar. And every element had a solar piece to it. The vehicles have solar pieces. Your roads have a solar tiles. The buildings have solar tiles. They're built into the side of the building, so it looks like a regular building, but it's collecting. And we've talked about this in the past. What does that look like? What was the vision graphically? We're doing the art, but realistically, what would it be if every unit is contributing to power, just like your room or your small house or your section of town? Then all of a sudden it's not about one specific thing providing power like it is now. I mean, traditionally, we have a power plant. It dumps it into the grid, which is our topic. Dumps it into the grid, and we suck off that grid. We get power from that grid. And the more, when we start using too much of that power, they add another power plant, or they get it from a different source in the whether it's a wind or it's the few specific types that I mentioned before. So in this specific instance, each unit now contributes to the grid itself, because each unit is part of the grid and using it, but each unit is now also providing it. So now you have a different kind of structural dichotomy of how you would envision a power grid. Instead of it being, Tampa, there would be a TECO, TECO's going and providing the power. Now we are providing the power together, and so it becomes a little bit of a different thing. We start looking at it from a monetary standpoint. And I guess you could use it in one way, like you said about the military. Everyone's doing their job and they're not worried about that bill. But it's not like that in its own way, because every person's contributing to that system versus one group is contributing, which brings you into that utopian where everybody contributes something towards each one of the elements that are part of the city, right?
And the other part of it, how do you get from current technology to whatever you decide the power grid should be for the city? I see it, the example I use, that there's how we got some of the ideas for what we're doing for Prefecture Go Academy is there was a company called Glass Lab, and this was like 2013, 2015, and they were teaching green energy type ideas using the game called SimCity. and
Yeah.
they had a education EDU version of that. And it was funny because they were teaching at that time, they were teaching like elementary school kids about, how you have a city, a regular normal city. This is what, I guess at that time it was a 2013 type city.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked the kids, how would you, go green? And the first thing they said is, we would destroy the get rid of all the gas stations and get rid of all the power stations. Anything that's not green, get rid of them. But what they didn't realize was, obviously, is because they were younger, is that once you do that, now you're in darkness and you don't have electricity to build what you want. So what I learned from that is things have to go in phases.
Mm-hmm.
So and to be, I guess, I don't know if this is green or not, the audience can tell us, is using the existing power grid that we have now. You have to store it. You're gonna have to store solar somewhere, so you can also store it in individual homes or residents, but you also can store or develop it at the station we already have.
Mm-hmm.
And just retrofit it and go through phases where you're phasing out the bad carbon part of what's creating the issues, and make the current power grids more green.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a huge important thing, because and we talked about this in length a little bit yesterday too, but what is the impact? People say, oh, this is a solution. It doesn't matter what that is. Geothermal is a solution, or, solar is a solution, or wind's a solution, or electric's a solution, or whatever the solution is, right? And everything that we do in technology being, even a coal burning plant is a technology in its own, right? It's an old technology. We go all the way over, and let's say solar power, a relatively new technology. Every technology we come up with has an impact on something. It might be, the air. It might be the ground. It might be the space. It might be how many trees we have to take out. It might be whatever. And the important part to think about and remember in transition, it's about improving.
mm-hmm.
I think that we lose a lot of that in the conversations about power grids, because you have people that are very for something and you have people very against something. So I like picking on wind because I think windmills are really cool. I think they're really neat things. And I know that they can be a very sustainable source of electricity, not a singular source, but a source of electricity. Mm-hmm. And then you have the folks saying they kill the birds.
Mm-hmm.
You have folks that aren't as enthralled with the look of a windmill, and they say they look ugly. Look at how they ruin the landscape. Look at how they ruin the mountaintops. Look how they ruin the if they're out in the ocean, the way the ocean looks.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a place between each person's opinion of what that impact is. So like wind, although the impact of it not having carbon emissions directly from it producing electricity, that is, you might end up with the visual aspect being displeasing and having an impact on the way the scenery or everything looks, or how animals react around windmills.
Mm-hmm.
Solar is no different.
Mm-hmm.
In our conversation a few minutes ago, every unit creates solar, but now we think about it from starting our topic. It's all about the Benjamins.
Mm-hmm.
People, pick on New York State. They like to give, tax credits for folks to put solar on their homes. It still doesn't offset enough of the cost of the solar panels and stuff for them to actually justify why I would put a solar panel on my home. And then once I put it on the home, I still have a 10-year window before I even get the money back, basically, from the cost savings of having a solar panel on my home. Why would I ever put a solar panel on my home? Would become my question, because it's not economically feasible. That transition becomes slower, for people to say, sure, let's put solar panels on all the homes. Let's make all the windows, with the, what's the word for that film they use? You've been telling me about photosynthetic.
Oh, the photovoltaic.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, the photo. It's like a paint that's supposed to be solar, but it's not. Yeah, it's. I think it's still in development, but it's not as efficient, or doesn't. It doesn't produce a lot of energy. Yeah,
But I mean,
but
you have all these different things, you know. So like with that, that's a new technology that's untested. Maybe someday that's how we solve the conundrum of the cost of putting big, clunky, ugly panels on people's roofs, you know? And, you know, the transition from something old to something new, you still will not have a singular source.
no, no.
You know,
That's
we have to have a redundancy because, you know, we'll go with the argument the sun's not always out, the
mhm,
wind doesn't always blow, you know, the tide isn't always as strong. You
mhm,
know, the river may not always flow the same speed. We might run out of coal, you know,
mhm.
we might run out of uranium. And so when you start going through all the different things, having a variety of different ways of generating electricity, I think is an important thing. So like even with what we've talked about with the city, you know, we talk about solar a lot in our conversations, but there are other sources that we would use to make sure that if the solar wasn't doing what it's supposed to do, right,
Mhm.
that we would have the ability to still produce electricity.
Yeah, and the redundancy is kind of important. And the other part that no one talks about from uh, a novice level, like I'm sure experts and scientists are talking about this, but the layman like us thinking about uh, that not only are you changing the power grid to green or more clean, the technology that's going to be advanced to make a now fictitious Kaylee, but to make an AI, you're going to need more power with the new computers that are coming out the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Computers are going to be more powerful next 2 to 4 years. That means you'll need more power for them. So it's going to create, and then if you create an automated city with automated cars and GPS and all that, you're going to need, yeah, like I said, you're going to need a bigger power grid, a more powerful power grid
Mm-hmm.
also. So you got to think about that too, and that's not, redundancy. And to on your point about having, there's a big difference between having a solar panel in your home now and getting the benefits or not benefits, to the whole futuristic circular city of like an Amish military type of a community, is that ownership is different in the concept, the circular city different concepts, is that just like in the military, I don't own the dorm or the home I live in. I'm just living in it because it's the benefit of me being in the military and taking care of it because I'm producing.
Mm-hmm.
So in, like I said, in turn, you're not in the circular city. The domain you live in it's your place that you're staying in your place that you're living in, but you're not responsible for the grid or the cost of it. You're benefiting from it through your work in the academy or what you're producing
Mm-hmm.
in our game, basically in the fictitious part in our game. But in reality, if you did develop a kind of circular city like we talked about, whether it should be resource based or barter or some kind of credit system, who gets what back,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be more community, more community. So you wouldn't be basically in the future city, you wouldn't basically be receiving or selling uh, the solar back and forth through your credits. You're benefiting it from the bigger picture of the city. You're benefiting, but it's not yours. The ownership isn't yours in that particular case. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing. You know, you're saying it's not yours, and that's a really important word. It's ours. We
Yeah.
don't look at power now
Mm-hmm.
in that mind frame because it's theirs. It's, you know, Tico's or Nice Eggs or whoever the power company is in your community, right? And they generate the power. They trade and sell that power.
Mm-hmm.
It's commodity. You know, it's on the stock exchange. It's it's, when you need more in one region, it gets redirected. When you need less in another region, it gets redirected where it needs more. It's a very advanced way of they manage their tangible asset, if I want to even call electricity that, but that's what it is. And so when you go from theirs to ours, right? We pay for our power now, but it's still their power. We still have to call the power company to come take care of things when something goes wrong. If everyone is generating the power because it's just built in to the structure of the building or their car or the sidewalks or anything, all of a sudden you go from where you have like an outage in one place that takes everybody out because it's theirs to maybe having a problem with a house, and now it's just that one home's issue where the grid is actually a now shared commodity that isn't theirs anymore, it's ours. And so that changes how that tangible asset becomes looked at. It's not something that's traded monetarily, it's traded physically, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so, the grid, the way it works, the way it's structured, how it gets analyzed, how, our current Internet of Things manages the power itself and data increments, where Kaylee would now manage how people's resources are being used when they're running their own machines or their coffee makers, or when they take their car out or they want to charge whatever, or, if they go and use the simulator for whatever, or they go to school and they turn the lights on. Everything then becomes managed so that the resource of ours is still very efficient and that you're storing it and keeping some for later. Sort of like, when we're coming back monetarily, how we save money so we have it for a rainy day. We're saving the power, in a system that allows us to save our stuff for a rainy day, So.
And if you talk about the utopia part of whether solar or wind, those are the main two. Mm-hmm. The utopia thought is if I create a solar panel that's green and doesn't take a lot of cost to build, it's going to last for 20, if we can get it to where you build it and it lasts 25, 50 years. Mm-hmm. And whatever cost it took there, eventually there's going to be a point where with the exception of maintenance and care, it doesn't cost anything because you're trying to get, so it's technically it is free because you're getting mm-hmm. it from the sun. And if you avoid the middleman of like a company or it's basically I'm using the sun powers mm-hmm. the just like a car, or a house that solar panels paid for now, 5 years, 10 years, however long it takes to pay for it. Solar panel. So essentially at some point it's going to be free. Mm-hmm. It's not, the only thing cost is maintenance and maintaining and hopefully the sun stays out longer than, like I said, then brings up the question of storage. And that's a, thing that scientists are working on right now is how to store it, wind and solar. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's anything else for us to much discuss on this topic with our circular city at the moment. But of course, I'm looking for comments and questions. As we've always said, we're not experts at these topics. We're just doing some research and having a conversation about, our fictitious world that we're developing in our game. And we'd like to hear what your thoughts are about, any of the topics that we have in our podcast. So please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you can see our next feed, and we'll check in with you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we reset the platform. We want to hear the story from you. We want to make this game for you guys. So let us know. Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you for watching our podcast. Subscribe to our channel. Let us know what you think and what you would like us to talk about next. Don't forget to check out our website at prefecturesp.com.